your screen, you've set it up. It should have told you I've started recording.
Yep.
Brilliant. Okay. Let me get to your notes and get myself ready. Today, I'm glad to welcome Mark Herschberg. Right, let's stop. Did I say your name right?
Yes, you did.
Good. Right, we'll start again. Right, today I'd like to welcome Mark Herschberg to the show. Mark is the author of the Career Toolkit, Essential Skills for Success That No One Has Taught You. From tracking criminals and terrorists on the dark web to creating marketplaces and new authentication systems, Mark has spent his career launching and developing new ventures at startups and Fortune 500s and in academia. He helped start the Undergraduate Practice Opportunities Program, dubbed MIT's Career Success Accelerator, where he teaches annually. At MIT, he received a BS in physics, a BS in electrical engineering and computer science, and an M.Eng in electrical engineering and computer science, focusing on cryptography. And at Harvard Business School, he's helped create a platform used to teach finance at the prominent business schools. And he also works for a number of many non-profits currently serving on the board of Plant a Million Corals. So Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. It's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Tell us a little bit more about you then. Where are you? People will guess your a sort of vague region of where you are from your voice.
I'm in New York City, but I don't have a New York accent because I moved around a lot as a kid.
To me, you have a bit of a New York accent, but then I'm not very good at picking out the accents.
Yeah, to a real New Yorker, this is nothing like a New York accent.
Yeah. You're talking the Queen's English to a real New Yorker.
Exactly.
Brilliant. And what about you and family and what you're doing at the moment?
Sure. Have two great parents, wonderful brother, brother-in-law, and their kids, who I love to see when I get the chance. So just to give some context for all the things I do and how we got here, I have this really interesting dual career. I started out, when I graduated MIT, started as a software engineer during the dot-com era, started doing startups. And I realized early on, I enjoyed coding, but I wanted some of the people challenges that came with managing people. And I realized I wanted to become a CTO, Chief Technology Officer. But I also realized that to become that wasn't just about being a good engineer. There were a whole bunch of other skills, project management skills, certainly, but also people skills, leadership, communications, team building, negotiating. No one ever taught me these skills. So I had to learn them on my own. As I was doing so, I realized these skills are not just for senior people. They're not just for the executive team. They are for everyone at all levels, down to individual contributors. And so I wanted to upskill my team. I began to build material and train up my team. As I was doing so, MIT had been doing research and found these are the skills that companies want universally, regardless of industry or role. They want people with these skills, but they're not being taught. So that's where we created the program at MIT. I was fortunate to be invited to help create some of the content and then to stay and teach. So for the past 20 some years, in addition to all those startups and Fortune 500s I've been working with, I've also been teaching at MIT and knew we wanted to reach a bigger audience. So I turned it into the book, The Career Toolkit. And so now I'm a fractional CTO, but I'm also a speaker and author and do some other things related to the book.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So it's a little bit of a portfolio career that seems to be quite common these days. And we're all quite a few people trying to get that situation, isn't it?
Yes, more and more common, especially post-pandemic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, everyone kind of, while they were, I know my brother's a great example, actually. My brother is a motorcycle mechanic and it was at the luxury end of the Harley Davidsons. And he was furloughed, and then he started getting involved in doing things to do with 3D printing, which he was messing around with as a bit of a hobby. And other people I know just completely changed careers during that pandemic. So I imagine that the need for these toolkits for people's careers, if you start working on your own, setting yourself up as an entrepreneur, those skills come into immediate effect, especially if you start employing people. but even so, it's a lot of those skills you talk about are they're really valuable everywhere, but it's massive focus when you start as an entrepreneur as well.
It applies certainly as an entrepreneur or employee. And let's just do a really quick basic example. Let's suppose you get a little bit better at negotiating. And we're not talking about being the world's greatest negotiator. We're just talking about being a little better than you are. So imagine if you're going for a job and you get a job offer for 70,000 pounds. But instead of taking it as it is, you negotiate. So you do a quick call or a few emails, will take about 5 minutes, and you negotiate for 71,000 pounds. 1,000 quid more, that is not a huge lift. We can all imagine doing that. If you're 30 years old and you do this negotiation and you do nothing else in your career, if you sit in that same job for 30 years, 5 minutes of negotiating just got you 1,000 pounds more. For the next 30 years, you just got 30,000 pounds, right? That's amazing.
Yeah.
But of course, you're saying, wait a second, I'm not going to stay in a job for 30 years, and you're not. You're going to have other jobs and raises and promotions, and you're going to negotiate for more than just 1,000 pounds. And there will be other things you negotiate for as well. By learning to be better at negotiating, you can add tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of pounds to your lifetime earnings. Now, this is an example that we're doing for the same skills apply if you're an entrepreneur. Now, you are negotiating with your suppliers, with your customers, with your partners. In fact, as an employee, guess what? You're not just negotiating salary, you negotiate other things too. So by learning to get better at negotiating, whether you are an employee or an entrepreneur, and getting just a little bit better, you can have this massive ROI throughout your career. Now, the secret is it's not just negotiating. Certainly, we can do the math and say, oh, 1,000 pounds, 30 years, here's how it works out. But if you get a little bit better at leading, at communicating, at team building, at networking, at any of these skills, you're going to get the same compounding effect that is going to carry you forward and bring you more success throughout your career. So all of these skills, as an entrepreneur or employee, it is worth investing in them today.
Yeah, it's a fantastic example there. I think it reminds me of some of the conversations I've had with people about leveraging their time and about by improving your own personal productivity. And that's what, I can't remember which way I'm pointing to my book there, improving your productivity there. If you just reduce interruptions, if you just reduce the amount of email you do, and you cut down 30 minutes a day of unproductive time or less productive time, and then you use that either for your own personal break or get home early or whatever, or you channel that into your career, that it's compound interest, isn't it? It's that kind of thing. It's you save that 30 minutes, but because you're doing better with that, you've identify other ways to save or leverage that time to generate more, and then it kind of snowballs, doesn't it? And the
yes,
same,
that's
that
exactly
sort of
right.
Yeah.
So that's why we all want to invest in these skills.
Yeah. It's and I think it's the phrase that a lot of people use, and it's historically has been the soft skills, isn't it, for these sort of things?
Yeah, they're often called soft skills. Some people call them power skills lately. We've called them firm skills for a couple of years, but no matter what you call them, their value is critical.
Yeah, and I kind of see them as the basics. It's if you think about it, you could be an amazing engineer, you could be an amazing coder, you could be an amazing whatever hard skill as people refer to in your job. But if you don't get on with the people in your organization, and as you say, if you don't know how to negotiate to get more time even for a piece of work that you're doing, those basics aren't there for you to build that platform of skills on, isn't it?
That's exactly right. Let's do another analogy. We're going to do a little bit of basic math here. Imagine I give you a rectangle that's 4 by 10, and I want you to increase one of the sides by 2 units to maximize the area. So which side do you increase, the 4 or the 10? And feel free to pause if you need a moment to think about it. Pause before you come back. But now that you're back, you've of course said, okay, I want to go from 4 to 6 to give me 60 instead of 48 the other way. Okay, yeah, great. What does this have to do with anything we're talking about? Conceptually, what's happening when you put the 2 units on the short side, those 2 units get amplified by the long side, or we are amplifying the long side by those extra units. If you think about, all of us have long sides and short sides, more than 2, but let's just use 2 for the moment. So imagine in your example, you are that great engineer. That side is really long, but you are a terrible communicator. So your short side is really short. You are a long, thin rectangle without a lot of area. And so you might have great ideas, but if you can't communicate them well to other people, the ideas don't go very far. You don't generate a lot of value. By improving your communication, by getting a little better, your overall area increases and you're much more effective. We're not talking about getting up on the TED stage before the world.
Yeah.
We're talking about just being a little easier to understand or writing more concise emails or whatever your need is. Now, obviously, we still need to work on our long sides, particularly those of us in engineering. The technologies I use today didn't exist 10 years ago. If I don't pay attention, I become a dinosaur. But on a per unit basis, the best ROI is working on these short sides, working on these fundamental skills, as you point out. That's going to get us the best return. So certainly, whether you're an accountant or project manager or engineer, or whatever you do, it's mostly project managers here. Yeah, keep focusing on that, but also invest on your short sides. And that's where you're going to get a great return.
That's a fantastic idea. I like that visualization of it, and it draws me to. I don't know. I'm sure you've seen these. Remember these spider diagrams you'd get with different skills, where you'd have you start at the middle is 0 and the top end's 10. And I suppose if you think your engineering's at 10, and that does the same thing, doesn't it? As it spreads out, the whole total area that you're covering is more, because and it kind of indicates that leverage as well, doesn't it, in those sort of things. I've never thought of them like that before, if it calculated that sort of thing. I think it's because the other thing that I've heard advice on, and I agree with, is that you have to be careful, and I think you alluded to it with the skills that maybe aren't your strengths, about not taking them and trying to bring yourself to a 10 on everything, because there's elements that, like I said, the fundamentals, you need to be a certain level there, then these build on it. But sometimes people look at this now, I've got to be a 10 on everything. So they spend loads of time and effort on their real weakness. Whereas actually, as you say, that keeping up to date and keeping their main skill current and their secondary skills current and the secondary and the tertiary ones up to date, those where your main focus should be. But if your skills are really below average or below a level on these other type of skills, that's where you really can, as you say, you get that super leverage from it.
Exactly. I was a competitive ballroom dancer. I even went to England a few times for some competitions.
Did you go to Blackpool by any chance?
What's that?
Did you go to Blackpool by any chance?
I did not go to Blackpool. I've had a number of friends who have gone. It was always my dream to go, even though I would not have made it past the first round. But maybe one day I'll go at least watch, because I don't compete anymore.
For those who don't know Blackpool, it is called the Vegas of the North in the UK, it's referred to. And I'm not quite sure it's comparable to Vegas, but it's got a big ballroom there.
And the ballroom competition, that is our version of the Olympics. That is almost bigger than the World Championships. It's kind of the premier event. When I started doing ballroom dancing, within a few months, I already looked fantastic. Now, compared to people who had been training for 20 years, no. But compared to the average person or the person who maybe took a few lessons, few months of training, already I was far ahead of them. And so very quickly, I got better. Now, there were marginal returns. I did become one of the top dancers in the US, but to reach number 1, the return for the amount of time started to get very expensive. To get into the top 1,000, okay, Top 100, yes. Getting to top 10 took quite a bit of work. To go from top 10 to number 1, just a lot of work. And it wasn't necessarily worth that return on investment. It wasn't worth my time to push and be number 1. I will never be the best negotiator in the world, but I am a very good negotiator, and I have fantastic engineering skills. And there's very few people who have that unique combination. I might very well be the best negotiator among engineers, certainly among cryptographers, which is my subspecialty. So when you start to recognize these combinations, there is value there. And it's not like you're going up head to head against every negotiator in the world. You're negotiating against other people in your industry, in your ecosystem. You just have to be good enough to do well in that pool.
Yeah, that's great way of putting it. Again, there's a podcast called Manager Tools, which I seem to mention every week on this podcast. So, and it seems every time I talk to someone, it's something relevant to it. They always talk about that. It's the parable that in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. It's that kind of thing of musicians are the ones I think find it as well. People who are musicians. My wife is a really good pianist, but she compares herself to her teacher and brilliant pianists and amazing pianists, and to a non-piano player, I can mess around and make a noise on it. To a non-piano player, there's sheets of music with dots on, and she reads it and plays it, and I'm like, I can't understand it. And most people sit there and wouldn't even be able to fathom out what to do. And that's the same thing, isn't it? It's about being. It's not. But if you try to be the best at everything, you're going to fail. So you need to be the best at the right things. And as you say, if for you didn't want to be number 1 ballroom dancer, well, yeah, those marginal gains as you get to those top ends in any skill become lots of effort and lots of hard work on that. I remember I was reading something about motorcycles quite a few years ago in a magazine where they're talking about performance enhancements on your bike on a track day, and they put on different exhausts, they put on different fairings, they put on different lightweight wheels, all different rubber, all the different things on it, and for each one they recorded how fast how much it added to the lap with a pro riding around. And I don't know if they did a compounded one where they did all of them and then saw what was. But basically they did all that, but they were getting really small marginal gains. And then they talked about the fact that actually, if you lost half a stone, you get more power to weight ratio gains, and you'd be quicker by losing half a stone rather than spending 20 grand on kit. And it's kind of that bang for your buck, the return on investment is looking at what you need to do to actually achieve what you want, isn't it?
Exactly. When you look at retirement savings, certainly here in the US, we have to put in our own retirement savings, and you put it in the market and you watch it compound. The difference between annual returns of 6% versus 7%, 1% difference, but over 20, 30 years,
Massive.
That is hundreds of thousands of dollars, could even be millions of dollars. And so it's getting those small little improvements. They seem small, but as we've said, compounding makes a huge difference. So all of these, and that's one of the key things when you read a book like mine, this is not the final word. I don't have every little detail on each of these topics. I put 10 topics into the book, but my job is to take you from below average or average to above average, not number 1 in the world, but above average. If you get just above average in all these skills, the impact is going to be huge.
Brilliant. So you mentioned the 10 topics there. What are the ones that you cover in it? Do you want to just talk about them or just give a taste of it? Obviously, negotiating.
It is. There are 10 topics in 3 sections. And these are the skills that in studies done by MIT and other universities, we found corporations, companies want, not just in the US, not just for recent college grads, not just for engineers, but universally, this is what they want. Section 1, careers. Chapter 1, how to create and execute a career plan. We all know we need project plans at work. Why do we not have career plans? Because I can tell you our careers go much longer out than any of our projects. Chapter 2, working effectively. Things like managing your manager, understanding corporate culture. Chapter 3, interviewing. Now, not as a candidate. There's plenty of content out there of, oh, how do you answer this interview question? But we all have to hire. And most of us received zero training in how to interview someone. So we go through that process, how to be intentional with your interviews and hiring. Second section, leadership and management, leadership skills. And then management, I break down people management and process management. Process management piece is probably going to be the least interesting for this group because you've been focusing on it. And then the last section, interpersonal dynamics, communication, networking, negotiations, and ethics. And the way the book is written, there's a brief introduction of a couple pages, and I say, go in whatever direction you want. It's like a choose your own adventure book. You don't have to read it in order. You might say, hey, I want to get better at negotiating. I want to get those 1,000 quid more today. How do I do that? Go right to chapter 9, read that. Then go back to chapter 3, learn how to interview people better. Then maybe jump to chapter 4, working on leadership. You can do them in any order. It's a toolkit. Pick up the tool when you need it.
Cool, brilliant. So look, thinking about that, when you talk about executing a career plan, I find it really interesting. And as you say, with project managers, we're used to managing. We're used to thinking about what's this piece of work. It may be 6 months, 12 months, maybe a couple of years for some of the longer ones. Some of the construction projects, even if you start looking at some of the nuclear stuff, the decommissioning stuff, you start getting many years. But you know what I mean? There is we do look at that, we do plan it. And do you see from your experience in the conversation that actually that career, the end goal of a career for someone, isn't necessarily something that many of us have? Because that's the thing with a project, you've got an outcome that you're aiming at, isn't it? And maybe it's just talking to me, but my main goal is to come to work, enjoy my career. Maybe it's not, maybe it's because me, I don't know, but it isn't necessarily I've got this firm view of where I want my career to end up. And as we talked before about the kind of portfolio careers that are around these days, it's some of it is a little bit about not where I'm going to get to, but that journey of there. But I suppose the plan's useful for that as well.
That's a great question. Let's first look at if you do have a clear destination, and then we'll understand that and go to your broader question. Now, for some people, there's a destination. I want this title. I want this much money. I want a job where I can only have to work 3 days a week. Whatever it is, you have your goal. I want to manage a team of 1,000 people. Doesn't matter what it is, you have some goal. Now, the irony is that all of us know for our projects, if we were told, here is your project, here's your objective, hit this in 2 years, we'd say, okay, well, I better create a plan. I better have a roadmap. I better have check-ins. I better see how I'm doing. For our careers, if I want to be in this job in 10 years, do you have any plan whatsoever? And the answer for most people is no. Well, if you can't manage a 2-year project without a plan, how the heck are you going to do a 10-year project? You're crossing your fingers and hoping, and that is the antithesis of who we are as project managers. Now, in the book, I go into a lot more details, but certainly, at the very least, take some of your basic project management tools and techniques and apply them to create your career. In fact, here's something very simple you can do right now. I'm going to have you pause the podcast, only if you promise to come back. You're going to pause it. You're going to open up the calendar app on your phone and create a calendar event that says, think about my career, and set that as a recurring event every 6 months. And when you do that, you've already just put in a basic checkpoint, just like on our projects, whether it's a 2-week sprint or whether it's a quarterly check-in. We're going to do the same thing with our careers.
Yeah.
So you can start with those techniques and you get more advanced. Now, the question is, what if there's no, I need this title, I need this dollar amount? What if it's something like happiness? And hey, that is a valid career goal. My goal is to maximize my happiness at work. In fact, I personally, that pretty much is one of my goals. I want to be happy. It's not about making the most money I can make. It's about enjoying myself. Well, still, what is enjoyable may change over time, and that's fine. Because the thing about our career plans, just like our project plans, they're not set in stone. We know First, we're not going to follow them to the letter, but we also know things change, goalposts change. I work with a lot of startups and we say, oh, this is a product we're going to build. And we're starting out today, and 5 years from now, this is where we want to be. At some point along the way, we usually pivot and do something else. And that's fine. We say, oh, wait, better opportunity. We think we want to do this instead of that. Okay, great, let's do it. Throw out the old plans, come up with new ones. The same thing is true for our life. So whatever your goals are, and by the way, your goals themselves might change over time. When you're 20, it might be, I want to build my network. I want to learn a lot about this industry, and I don't mind working 80-hour weeks. When you're 40, you might say, I want to be home with my family. You might say, I just need this much to survive. Whereas at 25, you thought, I want to buy 17 vacation homes. So it's okay to change your mind and adjust your plans accordingly. So I think it's important to have a destination. Now, destination might be a title, or it might be maximize happiness or work the least amount of hours, whatever it is. And then we want to work towards that, knowing that goal can adjust.
That makes sense. Yeah, it really does. Yeah, I think I've seen things where there's obviously, funny, I've got a poster up here from a thing called Ikigai, which the Japanese concept meaning a reason for being, and it kind of sits there where you have doing something you love, doing something you're good at, doing something what the world needs, and doing something you can get paid for. And it's a Venn diagram, and the middle of it is the Ikigai, where you've kind of got those sweet spots of all four. And sometimes it's kind of, it's nice to be able to try and think, well, how can I find that thing? And that might be the part of the goal, isn't it? It's kind of, right, okay, these are the things I like. These are, how can I turn something I'm good at, love, and the world needs into making money? Because it may not make money. And I suppose if you think about it, there's probably quite a few people these days that are able to do those things through something that they like doing, they're good at, and the world needs it. But they can quite often be a philanthropic exercise that people will end up doing. But being able to turn that into some kind of media type thing, whether it be entertainment, whether it be education, whether it be just TV or whatever, that can end up creating someone something that they can be paid well for as well. And whereas probably a few of these things you wouldn't have been able to do it. It's like Mother Teresa was starting now kind of thing. She'd definitely have an Instagram account, wouldn't she? Do you know what I mean?
Yes,
And she would have sponsors. It's maybe I'm being a bit flippant there, but it is that whole concept of thinking about where, and I think where you get the different intersections, you get a mission, a passion, a profession, or a vocation. And sometimes depending on how old you are and what your personal circumstances are, you may be right, I want my profession, or I have a mission, or I have a passion, and quite often you can see those things that people have got. They'll be there just on a mission for like looking after people because it's what they love doing, and the world likes it. So it's kind of, I can see how thinking about that is so useful, because I've gone through looking at my own career to try and decide what I want to do, what I want to be. Sometimes it goes back to some of the things I wanted to do when I was younger. I started as it's an interesting one, actually. I went to college to do business studies. My brain was that I wanted to be on the stock exchange. I was a kid of the 80s, yeah. Lunches for wimps, a Porsche and a mobile phone, smart suit, living in London, doing something like that was where my brain was. And coming from a small country town in the north of England, I didn't end up doing that. But I was interested, so I decided to do business studies, and I was going from school, and a guy I knew was training to be an accountant as part of he was doing A-level accountancy and all that. And I thought, well, yeah, how are you doing that for? And I didn't realize really what I was talking about. That sounds boring. Roll forward 10 years, I'd been doing accountancy for 10 years. Because I'd moved from doing business studies, got a role training as an accountant, did training in that, and then I moved into project management through IT basically. And it's quite interesting how that goal, some of my goals when I was younger were there, but my subsequent goals weren't moving into project management because that's where I want to go. I want to go and do that. It was an opportunity. I took it. And I suppose quite often a lot of us have that with our careers, where we only take the opportunities rather than creating them. Until you're a bit older, when you start thinking about, am I happy? Like me in my 50s, midlife crisis land, it's kind of, is what I'm doing what I really want to do? Is what I'm doing giving me satisfaction? Is it giving me, because it rewards me okay. It's just that, is it giving me all the things that I want out of life? And it isn't all the time. Sometimes, and I think your career isn't always going to give you everything that you need. If your career is the only thing that, if it's the only thing that satisfies you, then you're kind of stuck because you need something else as well, don't you? But
we don't have to get all the value from our career itself. So for example, I knew a guy who originally wanted to be a research scientist, and he figured out he wasn't great at the science. He might be able to get into some bottom tier PhD program and maybe get a job eventually in some lab, but wasn't going to be a great job. Now, it turned out he loved sales, which also you won't do much of as a research scientist. So he got into sales, and he realized as a salesman, he could make a lot of money. And by making a lot more money than he could as a research scientist, he could take some of his earnings as a salesperson and sponsor a much better research scientist. His words, not mine. Yeah. And so one of the things he wanted to do was contribute to the world and science, but his best path for doing that wasn't being the guy in the lab. It was being the guy selling a lot so he could sponsor the guy in the lab. So we can find ways to create that value we want. It doesn't have to be directly from our job.
Yeah, that's true. Never thought of it like that. Never thought of it like that. So if someone's coming to look at your app, your book, you mentioned the app to me earlier, that you've got a kind of a complementary app to the book. You want to talk about that a little bit, and just kind of, because I'm really intrigued. You got my juices going on that when you mentioned it. I thought this sounds interesting. What's
so
that?
I created two apps, and the first is the Career Toolkit app. Now, one of the things that happens when you read a book like mine, like yours, other business or even self-help books, you say, okay, there's great advice in here, and then you forget it 2 weeks later because we move on. And unless you're reading that book to study for your PMP exam or something specific, it quickly fades away. Well, that's not useful. That's not why we read books. So I thought a lot about how can we help you retain what you read? And I have a background not just as an author, but also an engineer, as an educator. I've worked in media. And I started thinking through all this and came up with the Career Toolkit app. So it takes the key points out of the book and it puts them into an app, and you can use it one of two ways. Either you're saying, oh, I am walking into a networking event, and boy, there were all these great tips in the book that I forgot because I read 6 months ago. I wish I could look at them right now, right before I walk in the room. Well, you've got the app in your pocket. So you pull it out, you jump into those networking tips, you flip through them, you get that quick refresh, and now you hit the room with that top of mind. The other way is you might say, I am a new project manager, or I'm a project manager, but I've just learned all these new techniques in this great book. I don't want to forget them. Now, you're not going to go back and read the book. Maybe you took notes. You're probably not going back and looking at. So the app has a passive learning mode where each day at a time you set, it's going to give you a push notification. We don't annoy you with those throughout the day. It's you pick what you want when you want it. You get that little pop-up, let's say at 9 a.m., right as you walk into the office. You go, all right, yeah, that was a good tip. Swipe it away. And each day it takes 2-3 seconds, but it helps keep it top of mind. So the time you invested in reading the book is now you're getting that better ROI because you're going to remember it. So that's the Career Toolkit app. We created a second one, Brain Bump. And with Brain Bump, it's the same idea, but it's like a Kindle version. We have content not just from my book, but other books, blogs, podcasts, talks, classes So it's all this other content, and it's the same thing. You get the highlights, and you can save them to your favorites. You can look at them each day. You can look at them just in time. You can share them on social media. So it gives you access to the content you want when and where you want it.
It's really cool, because that's something that I think that embedding learning in organizations is hard. Whether it be formal learning from a book, whether it be a training course, whether it be a conference, whether it be a procedure and processes as well. And I think and a massive one that I find is difficult is project management lessons learned. And it just kind of, that straight away when you talk about that, it kind of sits there and makes me think, it kind of feels like it's pulling out the salient points. Does it automatically aggregate that sort of stuff, or is it something that is pre-chosen by you or others?
We have content curation, and just like Netflix, we're adding new content all the time. Nothing goes away. We're just adding to it. Yeah. And then you can pick, because as we get up to having hundreds of books, which I hope to have later this year, hundreds of books and blogs and podcasts, you don't want all of them. That's going to be too much. And you can focus on a particular type of topic. Maybe it's a book you're reading. Maybe it's a great podcast like this one you're listening to and you want to retain more of it. Or maybe there's a certain topic, and so you get a few books or blogs or whatever on the topic and really concentrate on it. You choose what you want and when you want it. And by the way, you mentioned organizational learning. I have another tool for that. So on the website, on the resources page, I have a number of free downloads. And these are tools I give away. I don't even capture your email because I don't want to give you any reason not to download this. I'm not trying to sell you anything. The Career Toolkit Development Program is the first download on the resources page. This is a learning program for your company. Here's how it works. These skills that we're talking about, they're not learned the way we traditionally teach things. When you were learning the periodic table, your teacher said, here are the elements, and this is a proton, this is a neutron, remember it. And you'd remember it and you'd write it down on the test. That's not how we learn leadership, networking, negotiating, or all these other skills. There is no formula. There's not simple stuff to memorize. It's more akin to learning a sport or learning how to play an instrument. You have to try it. You have to practice. You have to get feedback and reflection. And so the best way to learn these skills is through peer learning groups. And this program I give away for free is something your organization can do to use it. In short, I recommend creating peer learning groups, typically about 6 to 8 people in size, but you can scale it up if you want to go bigger. And then you take some content. Now, it could be, if you use my book, I have a companion that says how to use my book for it. You take a couple pages, you read this, and then you come together to discuss it. And you share what you got out of that as you think about leadership. And I'll share what I got out of it. And we give different stories and different lessons. And I'll say, hey, I have a leadership challenge. Here's what I'm thinking. And you say, well, I was in a similar situation. Here's what worked. Here's what didn't. This is how we learn from each other. Now, you can use my book if you want. If you don't want to use my book, use another book. They can use your books. They can use other books on leadership or any of these other topics. They can use blogs. They can use a podcast like this one. The point is, you get some content and you have that discussion, because it's in that discussion. That's like your scrimmage. That's where you're practicing these skills, because we can't go into the office and say, hey, everyone, I'm going to try leading in a new way for the next afternoon. And oh boy, screwed that up. Do-over, timeout, doesn't count. Not how it works. So these groups give us that chance to scrimmage, to practice, to learn. And that's how we're going to develop these skills.
That's really interesting, because that kind of works. I've seen the similar concept where you get book clubs as an example, just kind of business book clubs where they will everyone will read a book and then they'll talk about it and kind of get the idea in there. I think there's PMI run one in the UK, and you're right, because you can. The thing about reading a book, especially in quotes technical book, you miss bits, don't you? You don't get bits, or they're bits that the context that it's delivered in, you may not click with it. But sitting with 6 other people talking about it, and they say, oh yeah, I read this bit and it really resonated with me because I had this situation here. and this is what and if I'd known that, I could have used it. And I can see how those sort of conversations, those sort of mentor groups, aren't they? The mastermind groups that some people call them, don't they? How that can really help. And structuring that is a really good way of doing it, isn't it? Having that structure around something rather than trying to do it informally. Because yeah, I can see
exactly right. If you think, for example, about project management skills, I know that's something the audience has. And if they got nothing else and they heard, I should think about applying my project management skills to my career, go, brilliant. It's not a lot of extra work. You're just looking at the skills you have. Now, it could be something you just learned in the book, or in this case, skills you've had already, and say, here's a whole new way I can apply them to unlock more value. And that's the type of thing that you can get. It doesn't have to come from an expert like myself. It can come from a peer. It can come from someone's different perspective. So don't just say, oh, I only can listen to experts. I can only listen to people with certain titles. You can learn from each other. That's the secret. And so this program helps you do that.
Yeah, and I think that practical application, isn't it? It's got kind of a lot of the training you do, a lot of the books you read, being able to apply them is really hard. The only area where you get to really practice, I've found, is when you've got presentation training, which is really good because you get into that situation. And or on some of the training I've done some brilliant training where they and negotiating was one of the things. Actually, they gamified it in some cases, and that's really good as well, because by gamifying it, you don't recognize that you're doing it and failing at it or succeeding at it. But then if you've got a really good facilitator, who in this instance the guy's incredibly good, they're able to bring that out at the end and point out, well, when you did that, you were doing this part of it. But I also think the role-playing kind of work sometimes is fantastic, and in those groups you could potentially have those role-playing activities. Someone can pay, and you need to have a bit of structure on it, but I remember we were going in there, and you'd go in as a group, you pick as a project manager, you're going in to pitch to or meet with the new CIO and his boss, and this is what you're going to meet. You go in there, and actually what you've briefed for, because this other person's in there you weren't expecting, the meeting changes, and you can't practice that. You don't know when that's going to happen. But if you role play it, you do get that practice, and you can really make you think, actually, I know that. I went to say this course I've got, a massive zip file. It's a week-long course. It's one of the best courses I've ever been on, and there's a lot of content in it, a lot of learning, and I know I learned a lot there. And some of it I went back over, and we had a group of us who were kind of alumni conversations, but that drifted over time as people left the organization. But it was really, really difficult. It's difficult to consciously keep that training going. And as you say, with reading a book, keeping that knowledge in the book going and keeping it popping up in your head. I can see how some of this tooling you're talking about can help with that, especially. I think it's about embedding it, isn't it? Because once it's embedded, sometimes it's time recording is a great one. We all go on time recording courses. We've got time management courses. I've been on more than one. The skills are very similar in most of the courses, but I've let them drift because I've forgotten about them over time, or something else has gotten away. But you need to embed these things several times, and once they're embedded, they become habit, don't they? And once they're habit, you don't have to think about them, but getting them to be habit is the hard thing.
Think about playing football. Now, the game that your team is going to play this weekend, they've never played that exact game before. But what they did do is they ran a bunch of drills. They ran passing drills and scoring drills. And by having the drills, by building the muscle memory, they're ready for when that meeting with the CIO suddenly has someone else in there go, well, I haven't done this, but I've done this type of drill and that type of drill, and I can figure it out on the fly. Now, just like your favorite football team, they don't recruit someone and say, hey, you look great. We're bringing you onto the team. We're going to send you to a 2-day football clinic. And okay, you did it. Great, done. Now just go and play matches. You don't need more training. We hired you. We hired you because you're a good football player. And yet that's what we do with our team. Well, we hired you. We sent you 2 days of training. What more do you need? You don't need to practice this. You just need to do the work. And so this is what helps us by doing this type of thing, say an hour every other week or once a month. You're getting that training just like your football team does, just like others do. And you're keeping it top of mind. You're building that muscle memory, and you're going to be so much more effective. Now, your favorite football team, the amount of time they spend practicing versus playing is significant, right? At least 10 times as much practice as playing, probably even more. You might not have that ratio, but right now your ratio is probably 0 to 40 hours a week. And if we can just change that to even half an hour to 39 and a half hours, already that is a huge improvement. That's how we want to think of it. And by the way, if your company doesn't want to do this, and the way the program is written, you can give it to HR and say, here, it's all written out for you. In fact, you can cross my name out. I put this in the copyright. Cross my name out, put your name there and say, I had this brilliant idea. Take it, use it. But if for whatever reason your company doesn't want to do that, do it yourself. Go get friends, go get peers, go create a local meetup group, go find other people who listen to this show and say, hey, I want to create this group. Who's in with me? And do it yourself. You don't all have to be in the same organization.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And that kind of hopefully, actually, one of the things I created about a month ago for the podcast is a listener group with that kind of, not quite as well thought out as you, but kind of the idea of being able to bring together the speakers and the interviewees on here to be able to come in there, and for the listeners to have those conversations and continue this, ask more questions about this kind of topic, about this interview and all of the other interviews, and then hopefully bounce off each other and get that same sort of thing. So again, that's kind of it's kind of yeah, I'm going to pretend that I thought it out as well as you did for that. It's because that
you can take the program, put your name on it, and you did.
Yeah, that's it. And it's we could maybe introduce some of that into that with the people on there and have that conversation and use that kind of style with it. So yeah, I'll take a look at that myself. That'll be really interesting. I think it's again, most organizations, it's kind of you, and most people kind of think, right, you've got this training to do, and you do have these I've seen more bite-sized training coming through, but quite often it's around the mandatory training to get that tick off, to make sure that we know that we're cascading to the organization. This is the diversity, this is your ethics, this is your climate change stuff, and making sure bang, 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 you're on message and we all understand what the organization's view is, and upskills us as well. But then outside of that is that skill base, that extra skills, whether it be our project management, whether it be our baseline skills, as we're talking about, the fundamentals. If those tend to be those ones where they go, right, when's the day or when's the week you're going to go on that course? When are you going to go on that training program? But as you say, if you go on that training program, we don't have that conversation with I don't have the conversation with my team, I'm with my manager about, right, if you're going to go on that course, Nige, how are you going to make sure you embed that into your day-to-day job after you've been on that course? And the conversation should be, right, so maybe we do 2 of those bigger sets of training and go, right, 2 a year, right, that one you go in there, that one you go in there. And then for the next 6 to 8 weeks, there's half an hour where you're reaffirming that into your job, reaffirming it into what you're doing each week in the same way, and whether it's with those groups. And I think some of the sort of leader group where they have longer term training programs where you'll have the sort of fast track leadership things or leaders, future leader type things, those tend to do it, but we don't tend to do it just in quotes run of the mill training. And maybe that's the approach to try and actually drive. So it's embedding the training, isn't it?
That's right. We focus on a small set of privileged few, And we shouldn't, because it's most of us doing the work and most of us aren't in that privileged view. And the great thing about this program, because when you think about it, we say, oh, I'm going to take the top 10% of people and send them off to this training program that costs £3,000. Okay, it's expensive. You might not be able to send everyone at £3,000 for a full week where they're not doing work and they're learning. But with this program, there is no cost. At most, maybe you buy my book and use it, or a
Yeah.
different book. But again, you can use a free podcast like this or other content. There is no cost, so you can scale it up to your whole organization. And when you do so, you get a number of benefits. First and foremost, you're upskilling your team. Fantastic. More skills, moving that short side, making it slightly longer. We know that's going to be huge. Second, you are engaging your employees. Right now, we still are seeing effects from the Great Resignation. We're still seeing people looking around saying it's not just about the money. And if the company says, well, we're upskilling you, we believe in you, we're training you, people will stay. People will want to join. Third, you're increasing your internal network. Because when you do these, you don't just say we're putting all the salespeople in one group and all the engineers in one group. You want to create that diversity. You want classic diversity. You want men and women and different ages and backgrounds, but you want diversity in terms of skill set, of functional area. And that's going to help increase the internal networks, which really benefit the company overall. And finally, you are creating a common language. If, for example, the book you use is Good to Great, well, they talk about the hedgehog model. And if everyone's gone through that, then you and I can be talking about something and say, well, let's think about what the hedgehog would do with this. And go, oh, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. So you get these four benefits. You get upskilling, you get engagement, you get internal networks, and you get communication. And it is all completely free.
Yeah, yeah. I can see no downside to it.
So absolutely do it. And if your company won't do it yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, isn't it? Is you can choose to do that, and you can choose to do it on any topic that you want to do. Kind of. So I think we're coming up on an hour now, and just going back to the book, if there was one section of the book that you would say is the most important one for someone, if they couldn't find the time or the energy to look at the rest, which one would you say to someone? Read that one, do what that's it, and just give us a little précis of what it is in.
I don't think I can pick any one, and
question.
certainly it was designed that you don't have to go in order. You can say, what is it I want? It's almost like saying, I'm giving you a toolkit, pick one tool. You want the hammer, you want the screwdriver, what's most important? Like, well, what am I trying to do?
Yeah.
And that's going to determine the tool. If you're really not sure, so you might know and say, this is an area I want to focus on. If you're just saying, wow, I don't know what to do, I don't know where to begin, chapter 1 is a good place. Chapter 1, career planning, because it's going to walk you through. There are questions to help you think about where do you want to go if you're not sure, and then how to create that plan. And the plan is not just, I have this title, then that title, the next title. It's, I need to get better at this skill than that skill. And how am I going to do that? Will it be a job? Will it be training? So that's going to help you create a plan if you're really not sure where to begin.
Fantastic. So if people want well, actually, before I go into that, was there anything that you had in your mind that you wanted to cover today?
I think we got all. We talked about the book, we talked about the apps, we talked about the free training program. The apps, by the way, are free as well. There's the free resources, so a whole bunch of great things completely free for you to use.
Fantastic. So if people want to find out about that, then where do they need to go?
You can go to my website, thecareertoolkitbook.com. There you can see where to buy the book, Amazon, and other places. You can get in touch with me if you have questions, if you want to bring me into your company. There are ways to follow me on social media. There are new articles every week, so I put out additional content. There is the app page where you can download the Career Toolkit app free from the Android and iPhone stores. and then the resources page with a bunch of free resources, including the Career Toolkit Development Program and other free online resources. All of that is at thecareertoolkitbook.com. Then the Brain Bump app is under Cognosco Media, COGNOSCO media.com. If you go there and click over to Brain Bump, you'll see where to download the apps. Also for free on the Android and iPhone store. At the time we're recording this, there's something going on with Apple where if you type in Brain Bump, it does not come up in the search. It does on Android. So if you go to cognoscomedia.com and Brain Bump at the bottom, you can click, you can snap the QR code, so you can search for it on the website and then snap the QR code on your phone. And both those apps are free as well.
Fantastic. Brilliant. And and if people want to actually get in touch with you, just ping you through the website or LinkedIn or anything like that?
Either of those two websites or LinkedIn. I make it very easy, and message me whatever is convenient for you. I'm less active on social media. I'd say LinkedIn or the websites than some of the other options, but eventually we'll see even on the other channels.
Yeah, I'm a bit like that with things like Twitter. I'll occasionally dip into Twitter and go, oh, I've got certain comments in here I need to respond to. It's just, it doesn't float my boat, that one, for some reason. That's brilliant. Well, all I can say is thank you very much, Mark, for the conversation. It's some really interesting and fascinating direction that you're talking there about how we can think about our careers. And I know as project managers, sometimes you're thinking about the next project rather than your career because you've got that finite window. So taking us out of that bubble and making us think, actually, where's this project management career taking me? It's a fantastic way of thinking about it, and getting some of those other skills as well is really useful. So have a fantastic rest of your day. And thank you very much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me on.
No problem.